Hello and welcome to episode 6 of God in Film, the podcast where a Christian and an atheist dive into the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find any elements that have parallels with the gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm freelance writer and 11th member of the Wu-Tang Clan, Giles Goff.
And I'm filmmaker and answer to all of your problems, Phil Coleman.
And during this period of Coronageddon, we'll be trying to hold off the desire to bake industrial levels of banana bread by sticking our film geek robes on to analyse the faith parallels in the Harry Potter series, with a specific look at the Deathly Hallows. We'll be looking at the correlation between mudbloods and Samaritans, and why people who think that Harry Potter promotes the occult probably need a nice sit down where they can cool off with a cup of tea and a biscuit. Phil, which Hogwarts house are you in?
I took the Pottermore quiz a while back because Elise wanted to know, and it turns out I'm in Slytherin, and I was quite disappointed by that.
That is, you're not though.
I know, I don't think I am either, but apparently the gods of Pottermore have spoken, and I'm in the green robes, and I don't understand why.
There is, with some young people these days, Slytherin is cool. I'm not okay with that.
I think that needs to be burnt in a fire.
I'm quite conflicted on this point because when I first went on Pottermore, I'm fairly certain I got sorted into Gryffindor, and for me, that felt about right. But in the intervening years, I think they changed the format, and when I took the quiz again, I ended up in Ravenclaw, and frankly, I'm not sure how to feel about that.
I mean, how accurate is this quiz? That's what I want to know, because I wonder if I take it again, would I be in Slytherin? So I might test that after this podcast.
I think it's going to have a lot of impact on a lot of people's marriages, you know?
Maybe even mine.
Do you want to tell us your facts that you've got about the Harry Potter series?
Oh, yes. Harry Potter is a British-American film series based on the eponymous novels by author J.K. Rowling. Production took place over 10 years, with the main story arc following Harry Potter's quest to overcome his arch-enemy Lord Voldemort. 4 directors worked on the series: Chris Columbus, Alfonso Cuarón, Mike Newell, and David Yates. Michael Goldenberg wrote the screenplay for Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. The remaining films, however, in the rest of the series was written by Steve Kloves. Late in 1997, film producer David Heyman's London offices received a copy of the first book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, was relegated to a low-priority bookshelf, where it was discovered by a secretary who read it and gave it to Heyman with a positive review. Heyman's enthusiasm led to Rowling's 1999 sale of the film rights for the first 4 Harry Potter books to Warner Brothers.
So many times where it's somebody's secretary or assistant or receptionist or something like that can be responsible for discovering these absolute gems.
And thank goodness for that, because imagine a world without Harry Potter and the behemoth it is now. It's unthinkable. I wake up in a cold sweat thinking about it. Alan Rickman was handpicked to play Snape by J.K. Rowling and received special instructions from her about his character. Rowling even provided him with vital details about Snape's backstory, not revealed until the final novel, which hadn't been written at that point. So, the Hogwarts motto, Draco Dormiens Nunquam Titilandus, means never tickle a sleeping dragon. How good is that?
And it is good advice.
I've always avoided dragons. Every time I've seen one. I
mean, of course, being Welsh, trying to avoid them is damn near impossible. For the first sort of few years of my life, we went to school on a dragon, until there was damn legislation.
The last name, Dumbledore, means bumblebee in Old English. Also, according to the factoid trivia show QI in 2003, the word muggle existed in the early to mid-1900s as a jazz word that was used for pot smokers. Can you imagine if we still use that today, considering Harry Potter? Like, look at that bunch of muggles over there. Yeah, I like it. The floor in the Great Hall is made of York stone. Production designer Stuart Craig had the foresight to invest a significant amount of his design budget on the stone. While this decision was questioned at the time, it proved to be a wise one, as the stone was durable enough to withstand the footsteps of hundreds of actors and actresses, as well as several camera crews over the next decade to film the entire series. It's that sort of forward thinking that I really like in filmmaking. It's all problem solving. During filming, Daniel Radcliffe changed the screen language on Robbie Coltrane's mobile phone to Turkish. Coltrane had to phone the hair. Sorry, go on.
Let me get out of it.
You could just imagine tiny little Daniel Radcliffe just there, just kind of like, this'll get him. It's so funny. Coltrane had to phone hair designer, and I might be pronouncing this wrong, Aithne Fennell's Turkish father in order to find out the Turkish for change language. Which is just wonderful. Anyway, J.K. Rowling previously stated that the T in Voldemort is silent, as it is in the French word for death, mort. Jim Dale pronounced it so in the US audiobooks that came before the release of the movie, where the characters pronounced the T. After this, Dale changed his audiobook pronunciation accordingly.
Not being a French speaker, I did not know that mort was meant to be pronounced like that. So
yeah, no, I did know that, but it wasn't obvious to me at the time, because it was just Voldemort, just his name. It's all one thing. I didn't think about splitting it up or anything. I wasn't looking at it linguistically.
Yeah.
Steve Kloves was nervous when he first met J.K. Rowling. Rowling admitted that she was really ready to hate this Steve Kloves, but recalled her initial meeting with him. The first time I met him, he said to me, "You know who my favourite character is?" And I thought, "You're going to say Ron. I know you're going to say Ron." But he said Hermione, and I just kind of melted.
Surely we're at a point in the course of human history now where Hermione is everybody's default favourite character.
I'm absolutely wonderful.
If I'm honest, I think Sirius Black is probably my favourite character, but Hermione is by far and away the most competent character, I think. Also, the interesting thing is, if you remember in Philosopher's Stone, when they're trying to actually access the Philosopher's Stone, there's a logic puzzle. There's a point where she says, most wizards are good with the magic, but not necessarily great with the thinking skills, or words to that effect. And she's able to logic things out quite nicely. I realise I've just turned logic into a verb, but there we go. It was going to happen sooner or later, so let's move on.
Daniel Radcliffe was initially meant to wear green contact lenses, as his eyes are blue, and not green like Harry's are in the book, but the lenses gave Radcliffe extreme irritation, and upon consultation with J.K. Rowling, it was agreed that Harry could have blue eyes. You don't want your leading man to be just itching his eyes all the time. Steven Spielberg was originally approached by Warner Brothers to direct the Harry Potter series, but when he dropped out, he actually recommended M. Night Shyamalan for the project, who actually turned it down, obviously. Can you imagine an M. Night Shyamalan's Harry Potter?
I think he would get the darkness absolutely spot on. He'd get that gothic sense of things brilliant. I just think it's everything else he'd be rubbish at.
Unfortunately, yeah, and I just don't think it's his film franchise, to be honest. Sir Alec Guinness was considered to play the role of Dumbledore, but he died shortly before filming began. Why not hire the world's greatest space wizard to play the world's greatest wizard?
This is a bone of contention with myself and my wife Claire, because in her head, Richard Harris is brilliant as Dumbledore, and she still rates him as her favourite. Nowadays, my favourite Dumbledore is Jude Law. If nothing else, just for the outfits.
That suit.
You know how good I look in a three-piece suit.
I mean, I was at your wedding, so yeah.
Yeah, he just looks fab in it.
He absolutely smashes wearing a suit. In the script, the flashbacks to Voldemort killing Harry's parents were written by J.K. Rowling. The producers knew that she was the only one who knew exactly what happened.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
That's quite nice. In order to make the Dursleys' house even more unpleasant, set decorator Stephanie McMillan deliberately sought out the ugliest furnishings possible. Just awful, aren't they? You know what I mean? Warwick Davis, who played Professor Flitwick and the first Gringotts Goblin, also provided the voice for Griphook, who was physically portrayed by Vern Troyer.
Oh, really?
So Vern Troyer actually did the physicality, but they actually got Warwick Davis to do the voice.
I assumed that it was Warwick Davis as Griphook the whole way through.
What fascinates me is the fact that why didn't they just hire Warwick Davis, considering the man's stature and considering the role that they wanted him to play? Why don't they just hire him all the way through?
I think there becomes an aspect of representation issues to consider at that point. If you flip that onto something else and said, we've got several different black men, why don't we just get Samuel L. Jackson to play all the parts in it? That's when you start to see the problem with that kind of statement.
In my head now, I'm imagining the Avengers, but every character is played by Samuel L. Jackson. That's an alternate universe that I would actually like to see.
The Chitauri wouldn't stand a chance.
No, the Chitauri would just look and be like, actually, I've left the iron on. I'm just going to nip back. In a bit, Loki. Bye.
So today, we're going to switch up the format a little by bringing in not just a normal guest, but a guest co-host to talk to us through the faith parallels in this film. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Claire Goff.
Hi.
Claire, would you like to tell people about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am Claire Goff, as you have correctly said. Well done. I am Giles's wife, and I'm a massive Harry Potter nerd, so this is pretty much my ideal way to spend some time. First, started reading it when I was about 10, and had the classic, is my Hogwarts letter going to come through the post so that I don't have to go to senior school, and I've never quite got over the fact that it didn't.
I never knew that. You never told me that. That's adorable.
Yeah.
My heart just broke into two.
Yeah, and I've just read the books a lot, really, all through my life. The books kind of came out as I was going through secondary school, so I kind of grew up at the same time as Harry grew up. And I also have the audiobooks, which I have listened to pretty much on a loop for at least 10 years.
Every time we're going to bed, you can hear one of two options. It's either the Harry Potter audiobooks or the complete unabridged Jane Eyre audiobook.
That sounds most pleasant, actually.
I think
It is.
this kid is going to come out recognising Stephen Fry's voice before he recognises mine.
Quite possibly.
Just make sure he's not calling Stephen Fry Dad, because that opens up a whole host of issues. That's just unprecedented.
When I was discovering Harry Potter, I was already at university. It had already been out for a while. The films were on their way to being released that year. A friend of mine, Lottie, actually gave me the books to read, and I got to discover Harry Potter and Hogwarts at the same time as I was discovering Bangor University's main arts building, which looks a hell of a lot like Hogwarts in some places, you know? It's
Looks very
these
much
sort
like
of
Hogwarts.
really ancient staircases and all these like long halls and all the rest of it. Anyway, Claire, would you like to take us through finding the faith in the film?
Da 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 da.
I would love to. Thank you. Harry Potter and Christianity. When the Harry Potter books first came out, and even a little bit now, there was much controversy in the Christian community about it. Much hand-wringing about fears that it promoted witchcraft and magic and the occult. Thankfully, my parents were not super worried and allowed me to read it, but I do remember some friends who actually weren't allowed to read it, and that makes me really, really sad. But thankfully now people are a lot more chill about it and have realised that it's not going to turn a whole generation of children onto the occult.
That's a relief.
I don't like to judge people for their personal decisions and beliefs. You know, you decide what you believe and where your lines are, but equally, if you're going to criticise something, I feel like you need to have at least read and understood it first.
I, of course, have zero problems judging people for their beliefs. I silently judge people who don't reverse park, or people who film their videos in portrait mode rather than landscape.
That really does my head in.
Yeah, for legal and moral reasons are the worst. I think the author beats the critic every time. It is easy to look at something and take it apart and analyse it, sometimes to rubbish it and the rest of it, whereas it's really difficult to make something. So I feel like criticising Harry Potter, you are really just developing like a little cottage industry. You develop this little moral outrage, and then you tell people all the reasons why it's terrible and it's horrible and all the rest of it, and then people buy your books, and the primary reason being that they don't like it is because of the overuse of magic in it.
Yeah.
But magic is used fairly heavily in the Chronicles of Narnia, and yet that's not really much of an issue.
If you're going to try and take magic out of children's books, then there's going to be few children's books left. I mean, I grew up reading The Worst Witch, which I absolutely loved, and it's just, it creates a fun world in which to have stories with the magic as a sort of surround cushion to make it more fun and interesting, which I kind of think is what happens with Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And I think the term witch or wizard, just in general, conjures up images of Halloween and people boiling up frogs' legs in a big cauldron, that kind of thing. And, you know, if that's what people attribute first, then, well, there you go. They're going to see it as a negative rather than a positive.
It's a delightful subculture thing that I think, for the most part, we've left in the past these days. I do appreciate there are certain things about this particular issue that have some validity, but for the most part, I have very little patience for any moral outrage that's constructed just to get people's attention.
Also, one of the things I love most about the Harry Potter stories is actually how it reflects the gospel and some of the central teachings of Christianity. fascinated, which I am going to go on to now.
I wasn't too keen on doing an episode on Harry Potter because I couldn't see the parallels quite as strongly, but I am really looking forward to being convinced otherwise.
Yeah, I love it when you acknowledge that you're wrong, sweetie. As I was saying, one of the things I love most about Harry Potter is its promotion of the values of love, tolerance, acceptance, justice, sacrifice, and the triumph of good over evil. And there have actually been studies conducted which showed that children who have read Harry Potter show more empathy and compassion to marginalised groups. And J.K. Rowling herself has acknowledged that the series has intentional connections to Christianity. The really obvious ones that ties to the Christian story throughout Harry Potter, the theme of sacrifice being one of them. Loving sacrifice in the stories has a really deep power which is beyond the usual magic. The fact that Harry's mother dies to save him gives him protection from Voldemort, and part of the tragedy of his life is that so many people die to protect him. His parents, Sirius, Dumbledore, Dobby, Lupin, he loses loads of people who all basically throw themselves in front of the train, as it were, in order to protect him. And finally, Harry makes the ultimate sacrifice too and dies to protect his friends. Spoiler alert, he's not really dead. But if you don't know that, then...
It was quite a bit touch and go. I remember reading the books and being like, this ain't going to end well?
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm not ready.
Yeah, you just have a moment of, no!
Don't! JK, I swear if you do this.
Yeah, so obviously the concept of loving sacrifice as a gift to save others is pretty key to the gospel as well. And as the Bible says in John 15 verse 13, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Harry's sacrifice for his friends and classmates protects them from Voldemort's power in the end, in the same way that Jesus' sacrifice protects us from death and the ramifications of sin. One of the parallels that I thought would be interesting to look at is the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus is kind of tormented and frightened when he's faced with the prospect of going to the cross. And one of the most powerful parts of the final film and book is Harry's walk into the Forbidden Forest when he knows that he's got to die. He finds out that he's a Horcrux, meaning that he's got part of Voldemort's soul living in him, so he has to be killed in order to finally defeat him. And the long walk he takes reminds me of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he knows what has to happen, but because he's human, it doesn't stop him being scared or wishing there was another way out of it so that he didn't have to go through this. And the portrayal of Jesus there has always helped me to realise how completely human he was. His fear is so real and so normal for someone facing that kind of fate. And Harry too accepts his fate. He accepts that that's what he's got to do, but he's still as scared as any of us would be in the same situation. The book and the film differ a little bit. In the book, no one knows Harry's going. He doesn't tell anybody. He puts his invisibility cloak on and heads down there alone. In the film, he meets Ron and Hermione and tells them what he's going to do. Yeah, in the forest, Harry uses the resurrection stone to sort of bring back like echoes, ghost type things of his parents, Sirius and Lupin, to be with him, to give him the strength to do what he needs to do. And Jesus in the garden prays and spends time with his Father and the Holy Spirit to give him strength to do what he's got to do. But ultimately, though, none of his friends can help him. The disciples, there's not much they can do. In fact, they fall asleep. They're incredibly unhelpful. He has to meet this death alone in the same way that Harry has to. In the garden, he separates himself from the disciples and he is afraid and desperate. Yet, when the guards come to fetch him, he doesn't fight but accepts what has to happen. And in the same way, Harry accepts his fate and doesn't lift his wand to defend himself. In fact, he puts his wand in his pocket so that he's not tempted to try and fight back. We get a really visceral description of Harry's experiences in the book when he knows that he has to die, which they managed to some extent to portray in the film as well. It describes his awareness of his own body and his heartbeat and the limited number of beats it's got left, which is a really lovely and touching description.
It's heavy. That's heavy.
It really is. And in the same way, the descriptions of Jesus in the garden are really vivid. In Matthew 26:38, he says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." And in Luke 22:44, it says, "Being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground." And it also says in Luke that an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, which is similar to how these echoes of Harry's parents strengthen him to do what he has to do.
When you explain it and you put them side by side, it's very starkly clear to see parallels between it, and I think it shows just how powerful that scene is in the film. If it can remind you of like the Bible, biggest story ever, then it's got some merit, I would say.
Well, it's interesting. We talk about the Garden of Gethsemane. I think is possibly one of the most popular scenes in the entire Passion story, because it's this sense of like a calm before the storm. And if you think about it, that is a storytelling trope that is repeated throughout pretty much all of storytelling history. If you think about it, like in Henry V, Hal goes out to walk in amongst his troops the night before the battle, and we have this sort of sense of quiet reflection going all the way through up to even Game of Thrones and its last season. That sense of doubt has been something that I think is always stuck with me. I think a lot of Christians the world over would agree with that.
So one of the other things that I wanted to look at was the radical acceptance of outsiders as a shared theme between the Gospel and the Harry Potter series. So like Jesus's acceptance and love for lepers, tax collectors and prostitutes, all the people that would normally be very much on the outside of society, the Harry Potter films and books encourage acceptance of those who are different to you. Muggle-born witches and wizards are often looked down on because they're not so-called pure-blood wizards and witches. Hagrid is shamed for being a half-giant. Magical creatures such as centaurs and goblins and house elves have been persecuted by the wizarding world for centuries due to being different. Lupin, Remus Lupin, one of my favourite characters, is persecuted for being a werewolf. And J.K. Rowling actually said that werewolves were a metaphor for illnesses that carry stigma, such as HIV and AIDS.
I totally see it, actually. I totally see it now, but that's not something I would have drawn a conclusion to.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating.
I like that.
And Harry and his friends' acceptance of Lupin can really be compared to Jesus' acceptance of lepers, who were, the equivalent of the day, were real outcasts in society, and nobody really wanted to go near them.
Right.
House elves in the Harry Potter series in particular get a really raw deal, and Hermione...
They really do.
They really do.
If they've got to be given a sock, then they think, oh, thank goodness for that. I've finally got a sock. Glory! You know what I mean? Just like, that's rough.
Yeah. And Hermione is really passionate about freeing them from the slavery that wizards hold them in. And one of the things that's always struck me about Jesus is his compassionate inclusion of people that others seek to exclude, particularly women. We see lots of examples of this. He speaks to the Samaritan woman at the well. He defends the woman caught in adultery. He shows love to the woman who pours perfume on his feet. And one of my favourites is the story of Mary and Martha, where Martha basically is getting mad at Mary for not helping her with making dinner. It sounds like all the disciples have descended on the house. She's like, oh my gosh, I've got to serve all these people. I'm really stressed out. And Mary is just sitting there chatting with Jesus. It's really annoying. She should be helping me. It's not fair. And I always kind of identified with that until I heard an alternative interpretation of this, where Mary's posture, as it's described, is she's sitting at Jesus' feet while he's speaking to her. And this was a particular position that was demonstrative of a student learning from a rabbi. So one interpretation of this is that Jesus was defending her right to learn from him. I really love that interpretation. So he's kind of saying, no, she doesn't have to make the dinner. She can sit here and learn like a student, and she has a right to do that, which I love.
I think that's entirely fair as well. Like, if you don't have the opportunity to learn, then how can you grow as a person, faith or not?
Yeah. And the book, the Harry Potter books are the lines are drawn very clearly on this point, that the good guys are the ones who are accepting and the bad guys are the ones who are prejudiced. There's some little wiggle room with characters like Ron Weasley, who've always had the privilege of having pure blood status and have never really examined their own prejudices, but you sort of see him do that throughout the course of the book, so at least I think you do anyway.
Yeah, you definitely do. Yeah, by the end there's that wonderful bit which leads up to Hermione snogging him furiously when he's talking about defending the house elves and he's kind of finally got to that point.
I especially like the term snogging furiously.
yeah, there's a lot of that in this household.
I don't need to know anymore. Thank you.
No, you do, and that'll be covered in our next podcast.
What, is this a different podcast?
With Jigger and Clash.
Oh no.
I was a little bit disappointed actually that the film changed that. The point where they kiss is when they've just destroyed a Horcrux, which is lovely. But in the books, the reason Hermione kisses Ron is because he talks about making sure that the house elves get out safely, and I always thought that was a really lovely moment, and I was really sad that they missed that.
That's so cute.
We're going to have a separate podcast about all the things that Claire is disappointed with in the film series, and that will be 15 hours long.
Yes. I mean, I don't want to be one of these people that slams the film relentlessly, because they do some things really well. Some of it is great, but any big Harry Potter fans, if I say, "Harry, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire?" will instantly know what I mean and understand the rage that I feel.
Did you do that in the cinema? I hope so.
Just to echo a point you said, that whenever church or churches want to exclude a certain people or a subgroup and say that your God's forgiveness only goes so far, you can't be what you are, I tend to find that Jesus went wherever the excluded people were. Jesus encouraged his followers, even beyond his death, to sort of go to the Gentiles, to go to the people that weren't considered worthy. And I think that's really important and a really strong message that the books and obviously the gospel share.
I mean, for whether you believe in God or not, just be a good person, you know, or at least try your best. If it doesn't come natural to you, just accept everyone.
There are actually even some Bible verses that turn up in Harry Potter, believe it or not. The tombstone of Lily and James Potter, which we see when Harry and Hermione go to Godric's Hollow, has a Bible verse inscribed on it, which is 1 Corinthians 15 verse 26. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. And this is referring to life beyond death, the fact that death is not the end. And death is a big part of the Harry Potter books, apart from the fact that a lot of people die. It's really...
Yeah, it is just littered with death.
Yeah,
it's just
really
tripped over a bit of death again.
Yeah.
Great.
And Dumbledore is adamant that death is not something to be feared. He says that to the well-organised mind, death is but the next great adventure, which is a fantastic quote.
Amen.
But that doesn't mean that there isn't a great deal of anger experienced when loved ones die, naturally. At the end of the Order of the Phoenix in the Ministry of Magic, we see the place where the Department of Mysteries are studying death. And this is represented by a veil fluttering in an archway. And this, first of all, shows how thin the barrier is between this life and the next. It's nothing but a fluttering veil. And we all remember the absolutely heartbreaking moment when Sirius falls through the veil. And Harry is convinced that at any moment he's going to reappear again, and he doesn't accept at first that he is gone. It's really sad.
I read that 17 years ago. Not ready to talk about it yet.
And actually, I think that is a moment that the film does really, really well, actually.
I was just about to say that. I remember that part in the film, because I've actually seen that scene recently. It's just so heartbreaking, the way he just sort of goes away. It's like when you see like a lion cub go up to like their dead mum and just be like, get up, please. You know, it's just, it's awful. Yeah. And you just have Harry just kind of screaming for him and not believing that he's gone, and it is absolutely tragic. At the moment when Jesus dies, the veil in the temple is torn in two, which represents the destruction of the barrier between us and God, which is a massive moment.
Phil, how familiar are you with the idea of the veil in the temple?
Not as familiar as I could be.
Essentially, in the sort of first century synagogue that they'd have in Jerusalem, there would be different sections within the temple. So if you were a Gentile, you could go, let's say, this far, you know, and if you're a Jewish woman, you can go this far. And if you're a Jewish man, you can go this far. But then you can only get further if you're a priest. And then we eventually get to a certain point, a small bit, which is the Holy of Holies, effectively, where it's surrounded by a very thick, very heavy curtain. It would be once a year, the head priest would go into this place surrounded with this curtain, this veil. Where the idea is that would be where you could experience God directly.
Yeah, essentially that is the place where God dwells in the temple.
Where God dwells. One of the lines right after Jesus dies in the Gospels is that the skies turn black and the curtain in the temple, or the veil in the temple, is torn in two. And what that signifies is that God isn't just in this small little place anymore. God is everywhere. Effectively,
yeah,
and
kind of it tears down the barrier between people and God, really, so that we can speak to him directly, which is awesome.
And it reminds me of the Bifrost from Thor. You know what I mean? Like that's the only place where you can cross from one place to another. You know what I mean? Although I imagine it's not anywhere near as neon and glitzy.
Who knows?
I'd like to believe it's like a disco.
I mean, that's how most biblical interpretations of heaven are. That there's a massive glitter ball, confetti cannons going off as soon as everyone sort of gets to meet their maker. Yeah, that's how I imagined it anyway.
Yeah, so beyond the veil is a phrase that actually comes from this veil that existed in the Jewish temple. Kind of, beyond the veil is death or something super mysterious. You don't know what it is. And I think it's really interesting that J.K. Rowling chose a veil in an archway to represent death, and I wonder if she maybe got that parallel from there, which I think is fascinating.
I think it's safe to say that there was definitely, like some parallels there.
All that really shows is that the Bible and Christianity exists within the Harry Potter world just as much as it does in us, and that Christianity can take as much or as little impact on people's lives as it does here.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's sort of grounds the Harry Potter universe a lot as well. You could just have this fantastical story about wizards flying around on broomsticks and catching golden balls with feathers on it, but it gives you a connection, gives you a thing to grab onto to bring you into the world, like a real world, like a belief system that the audience can sort of grab onto and just sort of like bring themselves in.
Well, one thing to factor in, and this is the sort of thing that a lot of critics would say, was how does this work? Because there are specific references in the Bible against occult and divination. So how can magic and Harry Potter reconcile? And first of all, we need to reiterate for the billionth time that magic in these books is a story device. It is something you use to tell a story.
It's fiction.
It's fiction. But the other thing I wanted to point out was that at one point it was absolute heresy to say that the earth revolved around the sun and to be a Christian. Those two things were absolutely irreconcilable. So the thing I wanted to point out is that faith and our idea of faith can evolve. It takes a long time to do it, but it can.
There are some things that are undeniable, such as the sun. So, you see it every day. It's not just a light bulb.
Another thing I wanted to have a little look at was the depiction of the afterlife. So we see in the Deathly Hallows that Harry, after sacrificing himself for those he loves, arrives clean and whole and free from all physical imperfection in delightful, clean, heaven-like version of King's Cross Station.
It's had a lick of paint.
Yeah, for sure. It's all light and heavenly, and he's greeted by Dumbledore with love. And this is compared with the representation of Voldemort that is there, who is this damaged, raw, pathetic little creature, which is quite disturbing, actually, which reflects the decisions he made in his life. And it just demonstrates that the choices we make have long-lasting ramifications. And what we see of Voldemort in King's Cross Station at the end of Deathly Hallows is the consequence of unrepented sin. It's interesting that the one way to put your soul back together after creating a Horcrux, as explained in Harry Potter, is true remorse. And this aligns with the Christian message that in order to be forgiven and set free from the effects of wrongdoing, you have to truly repent of what you have done.
There's two things I just wanted to maybe explain there, because, and I'm not a theologian, I don't have the Bible verses to hand, but there's this belief that when you get to heaven, you have a new body, you're made completely whole. And for people like myself who have long-term injuries, or people who are dealing with like chronic illnesses, that's always something that people kind of hold on to.
I heard that they tune in to our podcast up there, and God's he's got a few things to say.
He's just like, no, guys, that's not how it's like this.
If you have anything to say,
there is so much wrong with what I just said. I'm so sorry.
Father God, if you have any issues with what we've said, please let us know in the comments.
I can imagine that.
Anyway, I have just a couple more points to make.
Okay.
In a conversation between J.K. Rowling and Daniel Radcliffe, Rowling reveals that Albus Dumbledore is John the Baptist to Harry's Christ. And we see in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince that Dumbledore says of Harry, "Your blood is worth more than mine." And that shows that Dumbledore thinks Harry is the greater hero and has greater tasks ahead of him. So it's a little bit tenuous, I think, but you could argue that Dumbledore starts the work of destroying Horcruxes and then passes the baton to Harry in the way John the Baptist prepares the way for Jesus and then steps aside to make way for his greater work, which I thought that was interesting, especially that JK herself kind of saw it that way.
In the same way that Jesus wasn't able to start his ministry until he'd been baptized by John, Harry isn't able to defeat Voldemort until he's been educated and thoroughly prepared by Dumbledore in order to do the task. So I think that's a really nice parallel, and I like that.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to have a look at was the importance of choice and free will. Dumbledore says to Harry in the Chamber of Secrets, "It is not our abilities that show what we truly are, it is our choices." This is when Harry is stressing out that he has these certain similarities to Voldemort, and the Sorting Hat wanted to put him in Slytherin, but instead he chose to be in Gryffindor. And Dumbledore says, "No, that's the point. You chose differently to Voldemort, and it's not the ways that you're the same, it's the way that you're different, and that you made different choices."
I could definitely see why he was stressed out, though.
Yes.
Good grief.
Yeah, for sure. And I know in a previous episode you were discussing predestination.
It melted our brains.
Flashbacks. You weren't there, man.
Oh man, honestly, it was.
However,
we're having flashbacks.
It's okay.
Like
it's
in
okay.
Arrival.
Most Christians will agree the element of choice and free will is actually really key to our faith. You can't be forced to believe something. You have to choose. You have to make the choice. And Jesus tries to encourage people to choose the way of life, which means following him. In Harry Potter, there is the choice, as Dumbledore says, between what is right and what is easy. You can stand up against the Death Eaters and Voldemort and possibly die, or you can give in. In Matthew 7:13, Jesus gives the choice between entering through the narrow and the wide gate. Small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life. In the same way, following him is not always the easy choice.
Clearly, I don't need to be here anymore.
Next episode, Claire will be replacing Giles. Claire, that was really, really cool. I really enjoyed that. And especially that last one as well. It's clear. It's completely clear, that distinction. I have actually nothing else to add other than, yes, I get it.
Yeah. I think that was fantastic, and I think we're going to wrap up the Finding the Faith in Film section there.
Awesome, yeah.
And I think we're going to wrap up the episode as well. Phil, have you had a great time?
I always have a great time. I'm with you. Come on.
Oh, you. Flash, have you had a great time?
I've had such a great time. I'm talking about Harry Potter. Why would I not have a great
fair
time?
point. And I always have a great time when you're near. So,
you.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to cry.
She might let me sleep in the house now.
Oh.
Listeners, we really hope you've enjoyed yourself, and we hope you tune in next week when we're going to be looking at Star Trek with a particular focus on Star Trek The Wrath of Khan. Why don't you join us for that?
Oh, yeah.
I know,
yes. Yeah.
Somebody here hasn't seen Wrath of Khan yet. I think this might be the excuse to watch it. Okay, have a great week, and we'll see you soon.
All that remains to say is Expelliarmus!
Yes, that's true. Expecto Patronum.
Expecto Patronum. Wingardium
I did not expect that Patronum.
Wizard on!
Gordon Film is hosted and created by Giles Goff and Phil Coleman. Mixing by Phil, editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by Julie Walsh, and our theme tune was composed by Rick Lee. Fact-checking by Christina Stannard-Good. Waffle editing by Natalie Austin. Tech support from Claire Goff. Gordon Film is a Dask production. Please rate and review, unless it's 1 star, in which case just tell Phil by sending him a howler addressed to him in the Slytherin common room under the lake.